I always believed that raising a child alone would be the hardest thing I'd ever do, but I was wrong. Watching that same child stand beside someone who thought I was beneath them was worse than every sleepless night I ever spent working to give him a better life. My name is Michael Brown, 64 years old, and until a few years ago, I thought I understood what love and loyalty meant. After my wife Linda passed away, my entire world shrank down to one small but powerful purpose: my son, Tommy. Everything I did from that day forward was for him. I worked double shifts as a construction foreman, poured concrete until my hands cracked, and still came home every night with enough energy to cook dinner, check his homework, and make him laugh. I told myself that if I could raise him right, if I could make him kind, honest, and grateful, then losing Linda wouldn't be in vain. For years, it felt like I was succeeding. He was respectful, hardworking, the kind of kid neighbors trusted to mow their lawns and watch their dogs. He had Linda's smile, too, that same spark in his eyes that could warm a whole room. When he graduated college, I felt like every sacrifice had been worth it. I even remember calling Linda's old phone number that night, just to say, "We did it, sweetheart." Then one spring evening, Tommy came home with a woman who looked like she'd stepped right off a magazine cover. Her name was Stephanie. She wore a designer coat that probably cost more than my truck, and when she smiled, it was polite but cold, like she was shaking hands with someone at a job interview. I tried to welcome her. "Make yourself at home," I said. She nodded, glanced around my small kitchen with its old wallpaper and secondhand table, and said, "It's cozy." That was the first time I realized that word could sound like an insult. I laughed it off, cooked dinner, and watched her push food around her plate while Tommy filled the silence with stories about her law firm, her father's investments, her trips abroad. She didn't ask about me once, but I told myself not to judge. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she just wasn't used to people like me, people who worked with their hands. Over the next few months, I saw them often. Each time, Stephanie found new ways to remind me I didn't fit into her world. Once, she complimented my vintage truck with a smirk. Another time, when I wore my best flannel shirt to a dinner at her parents' mansion, she whispered to Tommy, "You should have told him it was formal." I heard it, pretended I didn't. Love makes you swallow a lot of pride. And I love my son more than my own dignity. When Tommy told me he was going to propose, I hugged him and meant it. I told him love was a partnership, not a competition. He said, "I know, Dad. Steph just wants everything to be perfect." I said, "Perfect's overrated, son. Happy's better." He laughed, but I could see how much he wanted her approval. The engagement party was my first real taste of what I was up against. Her family rented a ballroom downtown, chandeliers glittering like stars, waiters carrying trays of champagne I couldn't even pronounce. I showed up in my nicest suit, a decade old but clean, and brought a gift, a photo of Tommy as a kid fishing with me, framed with a little brass plate that said, "The best days are still ahead." Stephanie looked at it, forced a smile, and said, "Oh, that's sentimental." Then she set it on a side table like it might stain the linens. I stood there holding an empty glass, realizing that in her world, sentiment wasn't worth much. Still, I smiled, took pictures, shook hands, and told everyone how lucky Tommy was. When wedding plans started, I offered to help. "Whatever you need, son," I said. "Just tell me where I can pitch in." He looked uncomfortable. "Steph's parents have most of it covered, Dad. They've been planning it since she was little." I laughed. "Since she was little? I guess they always knew she'd marry rich." He didn't laugh back. That's when I realized I was the outsider now, even in my own family. I sold my old pickup anyway and sent Tommy a check to cover part of the catering bill. He protested, but I insisted. "A father's duty doesn't end when the bills are paid," I said. He hugged me, and for a second, I felt like I had my boy back. I didn't know that hug would be the last honest one between us for a long time. The day of the wedding came faster than I expected. I drove 3 hours to the venue, an estate so huge it had its own lake. The guests looked like celebrities. I stood in the parking lot for a minute, fixing my tie, trying to convince myself I belonged. When I walked inside, everything sparkled, crystal silk gold. The kind of place Linda used to joke we'd visit when pigs fly. I signed the guest book and went to find my seat. That's when the first sting hit me. My name tag, didn't say father of the groom. It just said Michael Brown, guest. I stared at it so long the usher asked if something was wrong. No, I said, smiling, just admiring the handwriting. During the ceremony, I sat near the back, watching my son stand at the altar, looking nervous but happy. When Stephanie walked down the aisle, she was stunning, I'll admit it. And when their eyes met, he looked like every dream he ever had was coming true. For that moment, I felt proud again. Maybe love really could bridge worlds. Maybe I'd been wrong about her. Then came the reception. That's where everything changed. Dinner was served, music played, speeches began. I stayed quiet, sipping water because the wine list scared me. When the waiter brought the seating cards, mine was nowhere near the head table. I was at a side table with distant relatives and a few people from Stephanie's father's office. I didn't mind, not at first. But then one of her bridesmaids walked over and said, "Sir, I think you're sitting in the wrong place. That table's for family." I frowned. "I am family," I said gently. She blinked, unsure what to say, then looked towards Stephanie, who was across the room laughing with her friends. Stephanie came over, heels clicking on the marble floor, eyes sharp enough to cut. "It's fine, Heather," she said to the bridesmaid. "We don't want to make a scene." Then she turned to me and said softly but clearly, "Michael, could you sit near the back? That table's more appropriate." I didn't understand. Appropriate for what? I asked. She smiled, a thin, cruel thing. "You know, with your working-class friends." A few guests turned their heads. I felt the heat rush on my neck. I said, "I'm fine here." She leaned closer. "Don't embarrass Tommy tonight." And then, as if that humiliation wasn't enough, she added, "You can take the man out of the trailer park, but you can't take the trailer park out of the man." The room went silent. Someone laughed nervously. Tommy looked down at his plate. He didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. My throat closed. I wanted to shout, to tell them all that every penny in this wedding was built on my back, on years of calluses and sweat. But instead, I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and said, "You're right, Stephanie. Maybe this isn't my kind of place." Then I walked out. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap. I sat in my car for a long time, listening to the muffled music through the walls, remembering the little boy who once promised, "Dad, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house and take care of you." Now he was inside a mansion pretending I didn't exist. I could have driven home and let that be the end, but something inside me, maybe pride, maybe pain, refused to let it go. Over the next week, I got a call from the wedding planner about a pending balance. Turns out Stephanie's parents had backed out of paying for some last-minute upgrades. The total owed? Just over $500,000. $500,000 for a single night. They'd listed me as a guarantor because the venue had needed a responsible party. I laughed out loud when I heard that. Responsible, sure, but not stupid. I could have walked away, but instead I got an idea. Call it poetic justice. I went to an old friend, a retired lawyer named Carl, and together we came up with a plan. First, I paid the bill in full. Every cent. I liquidated some savings, sold a few stocks Linda and I had bought years ago, and signed the check. Not because they deserved it, but because it gave me leverage. Then I waited. 2 weeks later, I invited Tommy and Stephanie to dinner. "Let's celebrate your honeymoon," I said cheerfully. They arrived at my modest house, looking uncomfortable. Stephanie glanced around like she was afraid to touch anything. "You didn't have to cook," Tommy said, sitting down. "Nonsense," I replied. "Family should eat together." We had steak, mashed potatoes, the works. Halfway through the meal, I brought out an envelope. "A little wedding gift," I said, handing it to them. Stephanie's eyes lit up, expecting cash. But inside was the paid invoice from the wedding venue. $500,000, stamp paid in full under my name. She looked confused. "You paid this?" I nodded. Someone had to. Would have been a shame if they sued the newlyweds. Tommy looked shocked. "Dad, why would you?" "Because," I said, leaning back, "I wanted to make sure everything about that night was unforgettable." Stephanie smiled cautiously. "Well, that was generous." I shook my head. "Not generous. Conditional." Her brow furrowed. "Conditional?" I pointed to the bottom of the page. "See, I signed it under one condition. that all media rights, including photo and video use, belong to the payer me. She blinked. What are you talking about? I smiled. It means I own the wedding footage. Every clip, every photo, every recording. Tommy frowned. Why would you want that? I stood and walked to the TV. Because, sweetheart, I said to Stephanie, you might have forgotten who I am, but the world shouldn't. I pressed play. On the screen appeared edited footage I'd had a professional friend compile. Every time she rolled her eyes, every sneer, every word she muttered under her breath that night, paired with soft music and captions like, "Love has no class." Within a week, I uploaded it online. It went viral. People saw who she truly was: cruel, arrogant, hollow. Her firm suspended her for behavior unbecoming. Her parents tried to sue, but the contract was airtight. Tommy called me, furious at first, shouting that I'd ruined their lives. I said quietly, "No, son. I just showed the world the truth." Then I hung up. Months passed. I didn't hear from him. The house was quiet again. Some nights I regretted it. Others, I felt peace. Then one evening, a car pulled in my driveway. It was Tommy. He looked thinner, older, humbled. He sat across from me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry you were right about her." I didn't gloat. I just poured him coffee. He told me Stephanie had left, that she blamed him for losing everything. He'd been staying with a friend, trying to start over. I said, "Son, you don't need to start over. You just need to start right." He nodded, tears in his eyes. We sat there a long time, two broken men trying to rebuild something worth saving. In the end, forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight they put on you. I don't hate Stephanie anymore. I hope she learns that money can buy chandeliers, but not respect. As for Tommy, he visits every Sunday now. We fix up old cars in the garage, eat dinner, talk about his new job. Sometimes we even laugh again. And every time I think back to that wedding, the glitter, the laughter, the humiliation, I remember one thing my wife used to say: real class isn't about what's in your pocket, it's about what's in your heart. Turns out, she was right. Always was.